Hi, everyone. Today I'm here with Nicole Bachot. Nicole is an economist with, or was an economist with Zillow, and is an economist that specializes in housing. So we're going to talk about housing and real estate today because it is such a special type of investment. It's unique in a few ways. And Nicole, I want to start off by just having a general discussion. What makes investments in housing so unique compared to other investments in terms of like liquidity, uh, the returns that you can receive, and other additional factors like that?
So, housing is a really advantageous investment to include in your overall portfolio if you're looking for long-term wealth management. When we're looking at housing, we're looking at probably the largest purchase most people are making in their lives. And you're looking at a really long-term contract when you're going to buy a house. So, when we're looking at housing, this is really going to be a really significant and important decision that people are looking at when creating their investment portfolios. And so I really want to dig more into, how do we come to the decision on when to buy, where to buy, how to buy, what type of home to buy, what type of mortgage products to get into. There's a lot of really intricate, detailed pieces there that can be might seem daunting, but can really be helpful for people looking to take advantage of the market we're in right now and looking to kind of shape their own financial futures.
Speaking of like when to buy, I want to start off with that. Housing's very cyclical in terms of price. Is there a tried and true method for timing it out just right? Or what do you see in terms of housing prices and the cyclical nature of them in terms of when to buy?
So it's really hard to kind of pin down when the exact right time to buy a house is because we usually know when that was after the fact. So if you're able to kind of have a little bit longer of a time horizon for I want to buy a house in the next 5 years, when should I decide that now is the right time? That's going to come down to competition in the market, availability in the markets that you're looking at. When we look at the yearly cyclical housing market kind of seasons, you have the hot buying time, which is the spring and summer. That's when people are listing their homes. That's when more people are shopping for homes. So you're going to see more competition, but you're also going to see more available options. You come in, look at fall and winter when things start to slow down a little bit. If you have more time to kind of sit and wait for the one right house to come on the market or that one right investment to become available, it could be more advantageous to shop at a time when there are fewer people interacting in the market. So that might be something that you think about in terms of kind of the shorter term ebbs and flows of the market of those annual seasons. When we're looking at something like what we've seen since 2020 with the pandemic, the introduction of really, really low mortgage rates, making a mortgage really cheap and affordable for a lot of people compared to where we're at today, where we've seen mortgage rates around 7% and have come back pretty significantly just in the past couple of weeks. That can make it a little bit more challenging of a time to be buying a house if you're looking at, locking in one of those longer term mortgages. So there's not really one right time that we're going to know until it's after the fact.
In recent years, housing prices have increased significantly. And when housing prices increase 20% and the economy only grows 3%, there's quite a bit of a shift. Can you give our learners an explanation of some of the external forces that caused this dramatic increase in housing prices in recent years?
So when we look at the history, the longer form history of home prices in the United States, typically we see somewhere between 3 and 5% annual gain in home prices. The past few years from 2020 to 2024, we've seen a significant departure from that, right? We have seen really fast growth in home prices. We've seen things moving at an alarmingly high rate and speed. And a lot of those things might seem, frightening or concerning, but when we look at the market and what's happening and those fundamentals that are kind of building upon to create that output, it starts to make a lot more sense. So it first comes back to availability of houses. So during the great financial crisis, we had home builders pulling back and saying, okay, wait a minute, all of a sudden housing is not really as lucrative as it once was, and we don't want to be part of this process at this moment. So we saw home building take a huge step back. It was about 15 years between 2006 and 2021 before we started to see home building ramp back up to the level that it needed to be at to meet population growth.
Really?
So we have a huge
I
gap in
didn't.
the availability of housing. Oh, go ahead, Ben.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah, so we have a lot of homes that just were never built. At the same time, we have millennials, which is the largest generation that we've ever had in this country, and they're all aging into their prime home buying years where they're breaking off and looking to form their own households and buy a home. And there are just not enough homes to buy. So we have this kind of Econ 101 principle of a really low supply and a really high demand, and that led to really fast growth. When you couple that with the low mortgage rates that we saw at the beginning of 2020 and through 2021, that really leads to a lot of people being able to spend beyond what they would have been able to had rates been higher, right? If a 3% rate, my budget has gone up significantly compared to where it is now at a 6% or 7% rate. So I'm able to spend more money on the cost of the home because the mortgage is still affordable to me. And if I'm locking in a long-term rate, I don't really care what's going to happen in the future if I can make sure I can pay that mortgage payment moving forward. And so we saw a lot of people kind of in this frenzy of, okay, I'm going to buy now because I could get something really nice at this low rate that I may not be able to have access to in the future. And so we saw a lot of people speeding up those housing decisions. And that's what led to this huge growth that we saw over the past few years. That's just now getting into the point where it's starting to balance out as we're getting back to what a new equilibrium is going to look like in housing.
So how did the pandemic really trigger this increase in housing prices, or did the pandemic play a role at all?
It absolutely did. I believe that when we saw a lot of people kind of forcing themselves into the housing market, the pandemic kind of acted as a catalyst for, okay, I was looking at buying a house in the future, but there's this opportunity right now where it's really cheap to borrow money. And I don't need to live close to my job anymore, down in maybe an urban core of whatever city I'm in. I can move closer to family or out into the suburbs and have a little bit of a longer commute when I do return to the office. So we saw a lot of people kind of taking advantage of the opportunity and the situation that we were in, saying, okay, I'm going to look for something that's a little larger, that has a home office, that's further away from where I'm at right now. And the market is allowing me to do that because of these low rates. So I'm able to expand my options a little bit. So that was what the kind of influence of that pandemic was just this catalyst of getting people to say, hey, maybe I should jump in the housing market right now.
Did inflation have anything to do with that though, too? So like, the government essentially they embarked upon quantitative easing, which is like printing money in many ways. Did inflation have any role to play?
Basically, when you're looking at inflation, we're looking at, okay, if I want to buy the same in econ, we call it like a bundle or a basket of goods over time, how much does the price of these same things change over time? So when we're looking at like CPI, Consumer Price Index, right? You're
Yeah.
looking at core CPI, really specific items that you're looking at. You're looking at the cost of certain food and grocery, you're looking at gas, you're looking at energy, and you're looking at housing prices if you're using the shelter-based inflation. And so as you're kind of tracking the cost of those goods over time and seeing how that changes, that's what's going to influence the change in the CPI, right? So the shelter-based component of that is called owner's equivalent rent. So if I own a house and I rent out that house, as a single family or my residential home that I'm renting out, that rent price is what's tracked over time, not necessarily market asking rents, which are going to be more multifamily type rents that are going to lean into a different segment of the market. But that owner's equivalent rent, which looks at both house prices and rent prices kind of combined in one metric, that's what's going to be influencing a pretty significant portion of that CPI movement. And when we see those rent prices changing over time, then eventually we'll start to see inflation following suit because that is a pretty significant component of inflation.
When there was this large increase in housing prices, there was also increase in the cost of renting, but it wasn't really proportional necessarily. It wasn't one to one, obviously,
Yeah.
in terms of increase in housing price versus increase in rent price. Can you explain how that relationship works and
Yeah.
some dynamics within it?
Yeah, that's actually been a really interesting thing to watch over the past several months is that change in the relationship between a rent price and your typical home price and your mortgage, really the mortgage payment, right? Usually in a normal economy in a normal time, it would be much cheaper to pay for a mortgage on a typical house than to pay for rent on that same house. And so it's really advantageous to purchase a home and to pay that mortgage. You're building equity, you're saving money because that money is being saved towards your paying down your mortgage balance. And rent prices are typically higher than that mortgage payment. And so you're just saving money on your monthly expenses, regardless of the savings component of a mortgage. What we've
Mhm.
seen with the significant increase in home prices is that those mortgage rates, especially now that mortgage rates are up, those mortgage payments have shifted to being quite a bit more expensive than rent payments in a lot of parts of the country. So we're now seeing this dynamic where it's actually cheaper to rent in a lot of places. And if somebody, say, buys a home and they decide, I don't want to sell it yet, maybe I just rent it out, they're going to find that, hey, at my mortgage rate and the price that I paid for my house, it's actually, I would be losing money if I tried renting this out because those rent prices haven't really kept pace with home prices in the same way. A lot of that has to do with the fact that we saw builders ramping up multifamily construction over the past few years. We saw a lot more large apartment buildings coming onto the market, which really helped to reduce a lot of the burden on rent prices from growing as fast as home prices did. So we've seen some relief for renters in that space. And just with the rapid and volatile shifts in mortgage rates that have really kept mortgage payments fluctuating so inconsistently over the past several months and the past couple of years, that's really led to this shift where it's not necessarily cheaper to pay for a mortgage anymore. And so when you're looking at that decision of should I rent, should I buy an investment property and rent it out, that decision's getting a little bit more confusing now as these prices are kind of fluctuating and changing.
So what about if you're looking to invest, like what you said? Let's say you want to buy a house and then rent it out. What does that look like in this environment right now where housing prices and renting prices as well are pretty high? How do those returns compare to
Mhm.
somebody who is just buying and flipping houses, for example?
So those are going to be completely different kind
Yeah.
of bases of what you're looking at when you're even looking to purchase a home, what type of home you're going to look to purchase, right? If you're renting something out, it needs to be livable, or you're going to be doing some renovation work on either side of that. If you're getting a mortgage payment and instead of paying all cash, then that's going to be significantly different, right? If you're getting an investment property, that's going to be a specific type of mortgage. You're going to need to put a higher percentage down than you would if you were just purchasing a house for your own self to live in. So you're going to need to put down 25 to 35% on that mortgage. And those often come with somewhat higher rates than a conventional mortgage would come with. And so you're going to need to look at, okay, if rates are already high, and we know that rents are kind of low and I'm going to get this higher rate and have to have all this cash up front to put into that property, I think we're going to see not as many people choosing that option in the current market that we're in right now because it just maybe doesn't balance the books as great. If you're looking at flipping a house, there's a lot of different tax connotations that are going to come with that. Depending on what state you live in, the transfer taxes can get really high with house flipping if you only own the home for a short period of time. So as we're in this kind of volatile market where we've seen things kind of slowing down a bit from the speed that we had during the pandemic, that might not be an option that a lot of people are jumping to pick up either is renovating and flipping homes because you're stuck with that asset until you sell it, and you need to make sure you're selling it for enough money to recoup the cost you put into it, to recoup the cost of turning around and selling it, paying those transfer taxes, paying income tax depending on how long you've owned the property and what your other properties are looking like. So it can be a really challenging market when we see these high rates and these slowdowns that we're in right now, when you're looking at investing in kind of these shorter term positions.
So, a complaint I hear a lot, as well as I'm sure you hear this a lot too, is that housing is more unaffordable than ever before. And if you really want to judge how affordable housing is compared to other areas, you can't just look at the average home price because obviously inflation changes that and prices don't keep pace. But what you really want to judge is this ratio that many economists use, and that is the average or median home price in proportion to the average or median income. And that ratio determines how expensive or affordable or unaffordable housing is. And the theory is if people have higher salaries compared to what the value of their home is, housing is more affordable. If their salaries are just a fraction of the average home sale price, then that means housing is more unaffordable than ever. It's pretty simple. And right now, if you look at it, housing, the ratio between the median income and the median home price is higher than it's ever been. What is the reasoning behind that? And when do you see this changing, or do you see this ever changing?
The ratio between incomes and home prices is a different metric, but also a really, I'd say eye-opening thing to look at right now is to understand, when we look at the past several decades of where home prices were compared to incomes, and you're looking at it today, it's not the avocado toast that's stopping a lot of millennials from being able to purchase a home, right? We're seeing
Mhm.
incomes severely being outpaced by home price growth in the majority of cases over the past several years. So, um, could you repeat the question a little bit of what you wanted to
So
clarify with?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, what when do you see this trend reversing? Right now, the typical income is a smaller fraction of the typical home price compared to what it's ever been. When do you see that changing, or do you see that changing anytime
Yeah,
in the future?
yeah, that's an interesting question. We did see in a lot of major metropolitan areas last year, or earlier this year, I believe, that rent prices were actually being outpaced by wage growth. So there is some room for seeing, okay, things have slowed down a little bit. We're letting, wages kind of catch up to where prices have been kind of running off to the past several years. So I do think that there is some movement towards more of a normal trend in that space. As far as home prices compared to incomes, I don't really particularly see home prices coming down from where they're at right now. We're in an election year. The next couple of months are going to be volatile just because it's an election year, right?
Mhm.
But after we come out of that, we get into the spring season of 2025 and beyond. I think we're really going to start to see things normalizing and moving back into a normal rhythm of housing seasons and price growth. So I wouldn't necessarily say that I'm fully expecting prices to be the thing that would change in that. That would be more, are wages going to be able to keep up? Is I think really the question there. Like,
Interesting.
are incomes and wages really going to be able to meet the same growth that we're seeing in other parts of the economy?
So this housing shortage, though, wouldn't that, if more houses get built and the rate of new housing being built right now has increased, you're saying that won't play as much of an impact compared to just wage growth for people? Is that what you're saying? Or
Yeah, I think at this point it's a little too late from home builders, right? We're seeing home builders, pushing forward, but every month we're seeing, a lot of volatility in the home builder sentiment index. We're seeing, new home sales kind of falling back the past couple of months from what we kind of expected them to be a little bit stronger than where they're at. So it would take a really significant and intentional effort to build enough houses to meet the demand that we have right now. At the same time of just building new houses, we also have a lot of the housing stock that's aging, right? We have the silver tsunami that's going to be coming into the market over the next couple of years, which if you're not familiar with that term, that's going to be looking at the silent gen folks and older baby boomers that are kind of leaving the housing market and moving in with family members or downsizing or moving into retirement homes. And that's going to leave a lot of older homes kind of vacant on the market. However, a lot of those homes are not necessarily meeting the standard of housing that we have today. And so those homes are not going to be kind of a one for one as new inventory comes on the market, be something that is going to be immediately move-in ready, right? That's going to take a lot of investment, a lot of renovation, and a lot of changes in order to make that housing stock meet the needs for people who are looking for housing now. So yes, we are seeing building increase to some extent, but I don't think it's going to be enough to be the thing that's going to curb prices from moving.
let's say I wanted to invest in real estate, and obviously I want something that will give me a high return. What would be your tips for finding a property that will increase in value?
Yeah, so if you're looking at just for your own specific, I want to buy a house, how do I buy a house that's going to give me the best return, in the
Mhm.
future? I think it's going to be really, really dependent on where you're at, what type of property you're looking at. If you're looking at a condo versus a townhome versus a single family home, what neighborhoods you're looking at in your own city, which is going to, you know, if you're looking at something like a Seattle or a New York or San Francisco and a coastal city, right, we're going to see more price growth and kind of demand further out from the city center is kind of been the trend over the past couple of years. If you're looking at a place in the Midwest, right, we're seeing a lot of urban revitalization in urban centers and downtown cores in a lot of those places. And so that might be where the future of, higher price growth is going to sit. So it's really going to depend on your local area and your specific situation. There's not really like a one size fits all solution that's going to help that specific house or call out a specific house as being the one
Okay.
that's going to make more money in the future than anything.
What are some key factors that determine the price of houses? And how heavily do these factors weigh on determining the price of a house?
Yeah, so when you look at the price of your typical house, it's going to come down to two components. The first is land, and the second is the building that you have. And those things are going to vary widely depending on location. I live in Seattle. The land that we have in Seattle is really, really expensive because we live in a coastal area and there's not a lot of place to expand there. So the land that's here in Seattle is the land that's here, right? There's not really a lot of room to grow out in any direction because you're going to hit a land border at some point. So that's going to be a determining factor of home prices in a lot of places is just the value of the land itself. The other a piece of that is going to be the building, right? And to determine, the size of the building that's on it, the materials that were used to construct it, how old it is, if it's been renovated, right? Those things are going to be the other piece that kind of determine how much does a house cost. And that's going to have to do with local labor and incomes, right? If you live in a higher earning area, it's going to be more expensive to pay people to build houses, and those houses are going to become more expensive. If you live in a place like Alaska where it's hard to get certain materials up to, you're going to be paying a lot more for housing because just the building and construction of that is going to cost a lot more money up front. So, those are going to be some of the bigger factors that influence that. When you're looking at, okay, if I want to, consider investing in maybe a market that I don't live in, how do I kind of understand which markets are going to have higher or lower costs moving forward? A lot of, hidden fees that people wouldn't think about, something like regulatory burdens, right? For permitting of a new construction home in places like San Diego is going to be way more expensive than permitting a new home in the Midwest somewhere, right? So those local fees and jurisdictions that are going to be charging those higher regulatory costs and permitting fees, that's going to be something that's also going to influence housing costs outside of, the supply and demand that we've already talked about. Those are kind of the fundamentals that just make a house cost what it does.
What about school districts, quality of school districts? Does that play much of a role?
I mean, that's probably going to influence a lot more property taxes than it's going to influence home prices. There are a lot of factors at play when you're looking at school districts and amenities and services and what's available in the local vicinity of a house that are going to impact, the demand for that area, the price of land for that area. But I'd say when looking specifically at school versus house, I'd say property tax is probably the thing I would be looking more at.
Really?
But yeah, I mean, property taxes fund schools. So, right, that's going to
Yeah.
be where you're going to see
Okay.
a lot of maybe more nuances that you might want to think about as somebody going into purchasing a home is what are property taxes going to do in the future? Is this a payment I can keep up with as taxes continue to rise? Just kind of on that last note there, for somebody looking at, I want to get into real estate, I want to buy a house, I want to buy an investment property. Taxes and insurance are really, really, really important. We're in hurricane season right now as Ben and I are recording this, and you're looking at places in Florida, there are a lot of homes that are not going to be able to have mortgage insurance on them, given the climate risks that we're seeing in a lot of places, right? So when you're looking at, can I afford this home? Can I, is this going to be something that's good for me long term? I think looking at those pieces of those rising costs that are outside of your fixed rate mortgage or your adjustable rate mortgage, of property tax increases and insurance costs, that's going to be really, really important to think about long term when you're looking at getting into an investment or buying a home.
Interesting. Yeah. And insurance rates are crazy. So it's probably
Yeah.
insurance rates are going to only continue to go higher, aren't they?
Yeah, and
As
it's a big problem in the housing market. Honestly, you see a lot of folks that have been in their home for years. Maybe they paid off their home. A lot of retirees who don't have the same, rise in income that working age population is seeing right now, and they're seeing their property taxes and insurance doubling, tripling, quadrupling over the past several years, and that's really challenging. And so, I'd say that's something that I would think about going into any purchase in the future is this something that, I can reasonably afford to see increases in as I'm kind of making these decisions?
what about HOAs? Those are becoming more popular. The fees are
Yeah.
going up for those types of arrangements. How does that impact the market? And is it something that people need to consider, or is it
Yeah.
something that isn't as big of a deal?
I mean, where I live, I'm seeing HOA fees over $1,000 a month on some condos. I'll say, hey, that price looks really great for that condo. Let me go look at it. And then you see, a $900 HOA fee per month slapped onto it. That can really change the affordability of homes. And those fees can increase pretty significantly year to year, depending on the costs and what that's going towards. So I'd say if you're looking at properties with HOAs, just understand what's covered. I'd also be cautious of connected buildings that don't have HOAs. If you have a townhouse without an HOA and there's a hole in your neighbor's roof, you might be stuck paying for, fixing that because you need those protections that HOAs do provide. So they are really beneficial, but I do think that they're worth considering and making sure that, that fee and that payment is something that fits within the budget of whatever it is you're looking to do when you're buying real estate.
So HOAs, is their net impact financially beneficial, you're saying, because they do
It
kind of
could
divvy
be,
up
right?
costs?
And every HOA is going to be different, right? So some are just going to cover exterior maintenance of the property. Some are going to cover all of your utilities, which is, could be a really big bonus for people. They might include parking or amenities like gyms and pet parks or whatever it is that that building is going to have to offer. So there are a lot of advantages if you live, in a neighborhood where the HOA covers your lawn maintenance and you really don't like mowing your lawn. That might be worth the money, even if you could do it cheaper somewhere else just to have it taken care of. So it's really going to depend on the specific situation, but making sure you understand what is included and what your rights are as a homeowner in one of those associations is going to be really I think vital to making sure that that's something that you're going to be good with for the long term.
So, in your experience, have you seen high HOA fees play an impact on the outside price of a home, like just the flat price?
Yeah, I haven't done any specific analysis on that, but I will say when I see a really good priced condo or townhome, it typically has a very high HOA. So
Okay.
that does play into the price, right? So your
Yeah.
monthly payment out the door might not look any different than, something with a lower HOA but with a higher price. But with that, understand, an HOA is not going towards your equity. That fee is going towards the association to pay for whatever it is that's included in that HOA. That's not something that you're going to be able to recoup in the future. So when you're looking at the difference between a property without an HOA, where all of that money that you're paying towards your mortgage is, paying through towards your equity, an HOA fee is going to be more like a rent fee, where that money is not going to be something that you see in the future.
So housing prices, they vary based on region. Are there some regions that are more volatile than others in the United States? And why is that if there are?
Yeah, I'd say every season, every kind of disruption to the housing market, there are different kind of markets that pop up as being, special, right?
Yeah.
So during the pandemic, it was Austin, Texas. Oh my gosh, home prices are up 50%, and what is going on here, right? So like there are a lot of external influences that just kind of depend on what's happening in the market that are going to determine where we see, prices moving either faster or slower. Typically, we see, stronger prices in a lot of our higher density areas. You think of coastal markets, West Coast and East Coast, for where we see a lot of the faster movement in prices, and you see a little bit more, I'd say, of a smoother, more balanced price growth approach in Midwest areas. That being said, we also see a lot of places in the Midwest, like Columbus and Cincinnati, homes move off the market or in those areas in a couple of days, regardless of the season, right? So we see, a lot of differences depending on where you live. A place like New York, it takes a really long time to close a mortgage in New York, right? So selling a house is a much longer and more tedious process in some places compared to, elsewhere where it's a lot easier just to kind of get that mortgage closed and move on. So I think a lot of those factors are going to influence the speed and the rate.
So if I want to buy a house or rent it and I have to determine what to do, how would I go about determining that and which would be most beneficial financially for me?
Yeah, so when we're looking at rent versus buy, I'd say the first thing I would tell somebody to think about is your timeline. If you're looking for 1 to 3 years, in almost any situation, it's going to be more advantageous to rent, right? Buying a house is expensive and selling a house is expensive beyond just the down payment you're putting down. So if you have, say, well, we'll just use really simple numbers to keep the math easy. If you're going to buy a $100,000 house and you're going to put 20% down, so you have $20,000 to put down towards that house, right? You're also going to be paying things like closing costs. You're going to be paying, depending on where you live, commission for real estate, especially when you sell that house, you're going to be paying real estate commissions. and you're going to be paying transfer taxes. So there's a lot of additional costs on top of that, right? That you're going to have to stay in that house for a longer period of time in order to kind of break even on all those upfront and kind of back end costs that you have on the sale. But so you're putting, say you have $20,000 and you're like, I'm going to either put a 20% down payment on this $100,000 house, or I'm going to go rent something and I'm going to put this $20,000 in the stock market. It's going to depend how risky you want to be with that stock market investment, right? If you're a renter and you're putting that money towards something, you might get, 8 to 10% return if you're, lucky and and really, savvy with investing. You might get a really decent return on that, right? And so if you're going to stay in a place for a couple of years and you're going to let that money work for you while you're renting, that can be a really great place to kind of park your savings. If you're buying a house, right? So say you put that $20,000 down towards your $100,000 house, maybe it only grows, say your time horizon's about 5 years. Say that money or that home price only grows 10% in that whole time, right? But that 10% is going to be on the entire price of the house, right? Because you've leveraged your debt, right? You've got a mortgage with that. And so now you're seeing your return on investment be a lot higher for something like a home price over a longer period of time, even with a lower, growth in the asset price itself, because you've been able to leverage your debt. So if you're going to stay in a place longer, I'd say, home ownership is almost always going to be a more advantageous route because you're really able to see your small investment grow to a much larger capacity than you'd be able to achieve in the stock market or wherever else you'd be putting that money in the meantime. But renting gives a lot more flexibility, right? If I want to pick up and move to a different city, it's a lot easier to do that as a renter. I don't have to pay maintenance fees and deal with a leaky faucet like I would if I owned a home. So there's a lot of pros and cons to both sides of it. But I'd say, that time commitment that you're looking to stay somewhere is, I think, probably the most important thing to consider when you're looking at what's going to make the most sense financially.
So why is it if it's not that long of a time commitment, why would that be necessarily worse than buying a home and then just
Yeah.
selling it? Especially when it doesn't take long for houses to sell.
Sure. Yeah. It might take, you might say, okay, I'm going to give it 30 days and sell my house. And, 30 days later, you're under contract and you're able to move on from that property. So it might not be hard to sell a house, but it's still expensive to sell a house, right? You're looking at around 10% of the sales price being paid towards real estate commissions, which, right now, if you don't know, we're kind of in the middle of this period of transition for real estate commissions, which is something I think deserves maybe its own segment in a course like this in the
Really?
future,
So real estate commissions,
where sellers might not be paying. I don't know
oh,
if
go
you're
ahead.
familiar with this, but buyer agent commissions are in a lot of lawsuits right now and maybe going away in the future. Buyers agents might not be paid by sellers, they might be paid by buyers, or they might not be paid at all. So there's like this big upset change in how the payment structure for real estate agents is going to look moving forward.
Why are there lawsuits behind this?
So there were some lawsuits against NAR that basically said that the buyer's agents were overcharging for the services that they were delivering. There's some lawsuits all the way up through the Department of Justice is kind of battling to try and remove commissions for buyer's agents entirely. So something is going to change. It already has changed.
What grounds do you have to sue for that?
There's like a huge class action lawsuit, but they just settled. The NAR settlement just went through like 2 or 3 months ago,
Mhm.
which basically, just for background, like how it changed in, I think it was July or maybe August. So if I had my house listed for sale at this time, and
Mhm.
when you list your house for sale on the MLS, which is the multiple listings service, which is where real estate agents are listing your home for you, and that's how they're able to interact and find homes for their clients. If I was going to give a buyer and seller pay buyer's agent commissions, is how it typically works in real estate. It's going to say on the MLS, this seller is going to pay 3% commission. That buyer, they're not really talking to their agent at that point about how much they're going to be paying them. The buyer's probably not going to be paying them anything. That's expected that the seller is going to be paying that commission. What has changed now is that the buyer has to enter into an agreement with the agent before they even start touring homes to say, hey, agent, you're going to get paid 3% for whatever purchase I make. If that seller does not offer 3%, I, the buyer, am now liable to pay you the rest of that 3%, or you do not have to go through this transaction. So that's the change that's made. And now they can
Interesting.
no longer see that I, the seller, am offering 3%. So the kind of issue that they were seeing was If I only want to give a buyer's agent 2.5%, that agent is going to look at the MLS and say, well, I want to make 3%. I'm not choosing to show their clients because they want a higher commission. This is
Mhm.
kind of removing that so that they're not able to kind of steer their clients towards certain listings, and that it kind of opens up more competition and opportunities for buyers to see houses that their agents were not previously showing them. But at the same time, buyers are now going to be liable for paying that extra thing if sellers don't want to budge. So that's what's changed. It's very interesting. But more often than not, I think what we're going to still see in the market right now is sellers are going to be paying 3% commissions or 2.5% commissions to buyers agents. I don't think that's realistically going to change in the next couple of months. But all that to say, selling a house is very expensive, right? So you're expecting to
Mhm.
put about 10% of the price of the sale. If you sell a house for $800,000, 80,000 of those dollars are not going to come to your pocket, right? That's going to go to the seller's agent, the buyer's agent, commissions. You're going to look at transfer taxes, you're looking at closing costs, all of that's going to come and kind of eat away at that sale price. So if you haven't owned a home for very long for it to appreciate in price, that's going to eat up some of the money that you maybe even put into it. And you might walk away with less money than you did at the beginning. So when you're looking at kind of owning a home for a shorter period of time, when we don't have 20% growth in home prices every year,
Yeah.
it can be really challenging to kind of recoup your initial investment. And especially if you're trying to make money or grow your wealth in that short period of time, that's probably not going to be the outcome for most people.
So you have experience working at Zillow. I always find Zillow a
Mhm.
fascinating app. What are some insights that you gained from working there? What were some things that you learned while at Zillow?
Yeah, I'd say I'm kind of like a try it before you buy it person. So a lot of the trends that we were seeing, I was like, I should do that. So I bought a house in 2020 because I was like, well, the thing everybody's doing, I might as well jump in and see how that goes for me. So I bought a house in 2020. Sold it in 2022 because home prices have gone up so much that we were able to keep it for a shorter period of time and sell it. The next trend was people were backing out of contracts on new construction homes. I put a contract in on a new construction home. I bought it and then backed out before we finalized the sale because the market had shifted pretty significantly. And then I moved on to renovating an old home because that was the hot new thing that young people were doing. So I would say I used a
See,
lot of the knowledge I had at Zillow to pursue my own real estate ventures, which has been, for better or worse, a really interesting few years. But
interesting.
on a more serious note, what I took away from my time at Zillow and what I really learned a lot there is just understanding that the market is ever changing. There's not going to be an exact right time to buy, an exact right time to rent, or a right place or price to do any of those things, right? It's really going to be dependent on your personal situation and what you're willing to negotiate on. What are your absolute must-haves versus what are things that you maybe have more leeway on in your wish list for whatever that may be, your dream home or an investment property or a rental. Really understanding what those non-negotiables are is going to be, something that really is helpful. And I'd say, a really big thing that I would push a lot of people to consider that, I spent a lot of my time at Zillow kind of working on and advocating for. There's free money out there, right? Look at down payment assistance programs, look at first-time buyer programs. There are a lot of things out there and resources out there to help people who are trying to get their feet wet in real estate and get into homeownership for the first time that are really awesome opportunities that a lot of people don't know they have access to. So I'd say pursue those options. You can find that information on Zillow listings. You can find that information through your own local jurisdictions. There's a lot of really great programs out there.
You're talking about like
And
federal programs?
it could be federal, it could be local. There's thousands of different down payment assistance
Huh.
programs, and they're all very disjointed. So there's a resource called Down Payment Resource, and they work with Zillow on all Zillow listings. So you can click on a home and see what programs that home qualifies for, which is really awesome. Again, free money. We like free money. It's great. It's easy. A lot of people
Mhm.
don't know it's there, but it is. So if you're looking to kind of maximize your opportunities, that can be a great place to start looking. So I'd say that the other thing that I would really caution people in this time we're in housing, if you're looking to get into housing, there's this saying, marry the home and date the rate. Don't do that because you never know what the future is going to hold, right? If you're looking to get into homeownership at a really high rate that maybe you can't afford much moving forward, it's probably not the time to get into homeownership. It's probably not the time to get into investing in real estate because you don't know what your own personal financial flow is going to look like in the future. And you don't know what rates are going to do in the future either. So the option to refinance down the road might not look that positive when you get to that point where you're looking to refinance. So what state, make sure that the payments that you have and the prices that you're looking at are things that you're going to be comfortable with sticking with for the long term because real estate is a long-term game. So that's kind of the advice that I'd leave.